Today, one often finds that while daytime performances will often draw from legends and tales of chivalry, nighttime performances will incorporate elements from TV dramas, popular songs, and all kinds of flashy lighting effects. This kind of improvisational opera can be traced back to the 1940s. In the years immediately after retrocession, the pent-up creativity of the colonial years burst forth. And in the space of just a few years, more than 300 Ke-tse opera troupes had been established. During the 1920s, when an urban economy began to take off, Ke-tse opera gradually shifted from the countryside to the city, and professional troupes began to form. It even began to supersede Beijing opera. But in the boom days after retrocession, there wasn't enough talent to go around, and opera companies had to rely on flashy gimmicks, even incorporating pop songs into their shows. When Ke-tse opera moved to urban theaters, the professional troupes adopted anything they thought could enhance its appeal. When China's Duma Theater made the broken melody popular in the 1940s, it was immediately incorporated into Ke-tse opera, becoming one of two major melodic elements. In the 1940s, Chen Chongsan's Gungla Society invested heavily to invite theater professionals with different backgrounds to write plays specifically for Ke-tse opera. This was a great innovation from the fundamentally improvisational nature of early Ke-tse opera. Audiences warmly welcomed this development. In 1955, Chen was inspired by the popularity of cinema to make the first Taiwanese language film, drawing on traditional operatic material. The huge commercial success of this film not only started a trend in Taiwanese filmmaking, but also brought Ke-tse opera to an even broader audience.
各位咱手机边所有这老朋友、老同事，大家好！真多谢你每天这个时间，大家拍开收音机来收听到咱所播出这个歌仔戏。昨昏演到到这个。
Also in the 1950s, radio broadcasting of Ke-tse opera became popular. Radio stations formed their own radio opera companies and would often record directly from studio performances. Because of the demands of extended broadcasting times, which required a wide variety of songs, tunes from popular songs were added to the repertoire, further enriching Ke-tse opera. In an age when forms of entertainment were few, Ke-tse opera, which was now available in theaters, the cinema, and radio, virtually became synonymous with popular entertainment in Taiwan. By the 1960s, with the introduction of television in Taiwan, many famous performers embraced the new medium, creating intense competition and establishing Ke-tse opera as a fundamental element of Taiwanese popular culture. The requirements of television opera, pre-recording, the preponderance of dialogue over song, and the reduced importance of formal gestures deeply affected the nature of Ke-tse opera. But television was the main channel through which young people came into contact with Ke-tse opera in the 1960s and afterwards. Back on the outdoor stage, Ke-tse Opera emerged stronger than ever. It divested itself of the constraints of narrative structure and returned to the intimacy of improvisational performance. Most traveling Ke-tse opera troupes had the ability to mix tradition with modern trends. While the narrative framework lauding the cardinal virtues remained in place, performers would incorporate improvised elements, including dialogue, props, and even costumes, depending on their audience and venue. These resilient troupes had their roots in popular culture, and in order to keep their audiences, were constantly finding ways of incorporating new material into their performances. By combining traditional and modern material, they were able to appeal to an audience of all. This constant innovation is an important reason for Ke-tse Opera's continued vitality. Playing immortals by day and knights errant by night, these actors played many different roles, but always with great conviction. On stage, they became completely immersed in their characters. Off stage, they returned to their normal lives. Although these two worlds might seem totally dissimilar, they in fact served to nurture each other. Active troupes would often perform in both city and country venues. They would be constantly on the move. This kind of life had many hardships, but despite these, the actors were able to always respond to the demands of their audience. Through periods of suppression under the Japanese and KMT governments, Ke-tse survived because of its adaptability and popular appeal. In the 1970s and 1980s, as the government began to take a greater interest in local culture, Ke-tse Opera began to re-emerge on the cultural scene, beginning a new era for Ke-tse Opera. In the 1990s, with the emergence of Ke-tse Opera onto the modern stage, there was inevitable conflict between theater orchestras used to following a score and the performers, who excelled in extemporary performance. Such conflict, in fact, just served to increase the musical expressiveness of Ke-tse Opera.